So what I put up here and why the thing that I thought would be most relevant to present to you guys, since you guys have all been practicing, is to connect the vocabulary of what the scientific terminology is to what we've been talking about. Because we often talk about FPJ and all this stuff, we have our own language. And I believe that one of the struggles with getting natural farming out is that it's a vocabulary issue. Like we're speaking French and these people understand Japanese, right? And we're saying the same thing, we're just saying in a different language. So that's kind of what the presentation I wanted to give here a little bit. And the key to me, well-fed diversity is healthy soil, is kind of the bottom line of what everyone's saying. Like you have well-fed diversity, and that is healthy soil, which then creates everything on top of that becomes healthy. Right? So as we went this morning. And I wanted to underline kind of a scientific effectiveness of the solutions that we got. So I just went to the conference, and this guy here is Gabe Powers. He is kind of nationally being recognized right now as a forward thinker and just leader in what he's talking about. So he goes around in lectures nationwide. And this is one of the first slides he talked about. That, you know, if your grandparents are eating bacon and we're eating a product that's called bacon, it's not the same bacon. It used to be like lean stuff with good fat that wasn't pumped full of antibiotics. And we eat that, and it used to be you could eat some bacon and be healthy. Nowadays, you go fry up that bacon, it's like right in mate, like, you know, right away. And so the same thing, the nutrient value has just declined. And this is the story that's even well recognized by all kinds of scientists. The USDA studies this. But really what the answer is, this is Bob Schaefer, another superstar in the bioreclamation, you know, bringing your soil back to fertility. And he's talking about growing a rhizosphere health and food quality. And so this is where I'm connecting the scientific words to this. Is that when you go talk to a scientist and you say, oh, if you can say rhizosphere, you're immediately going to get their attention. What is the rhizosphere? It's the area right around the root. So it's not, oftentimes we soil sample our field, right? And we want to correct the pH of our field, right? And so we go, we're too acidic, so we throw calcium, or in this case, we throw seawater, right, to alkalize it. But you don't need to do your whole field. You really need to worry about the rhizosphere and create a healthy rhizosphere. Because the way it works is if a plant, if you've ever seen that graph where there's the solubility of different minerals at different pHs, the plant will actually exude different sugars to change the biology. It will change the pH in that micro region and say it changes, puts out these sugars, the iron-loving guys that solubilize that. Now the plant can get iron. It'll change the pH really low if it needs aluminum. All of a sudden it'll make your soil really acidic, and now aluminum it can take up. So when we're trying to correct the pH in this general way, we're missing what nature is already providing for us in the rhizosphere. And so understanding that, that's why we put that diverse microbes out, because they go and they create this, they interact with the roots and create a healthy rhizosphere, which then grows high quality food. The other principles they had are basically maximizing biodiversity and maximizing living roots. This is coming from the scientists at USDA. This is Jen Kucera's presentation. It's at USDA up there. And she's really talking about what is the key. Well, the key is biodiversity. So what is IMO? Biodiversity. Right? So if we go to the scientists and we say we have IMO, they're like, well, whatever. But if we go to them and we say we have a biodiverse inoculant that we want to put into our soil, then now we're speaking the same language again. And these are all the benefits we all know about these. You know, breaking disease, decreasing soil organic matter, decreasing nutrient cycling, plant growth, and everything that comes from just biodiversity. And this here, this was one of the more telling slides. This one on the left, this is from rich forest. This one on the right is one where it was soybean monoculture. Now, you can see this one looks like a brick. And this one on the left actually looks kind of healthy, it's airy, it's all kinds of aggregation in there. What I noticed is that there's a trend happening with these guys that they're really anti-monoculture. And for a good reason. But what we have an upper hand on this that I believe in natural farming is, I later asked Gabe around in the lunchline, I said, what if you can have biodiversity below with a monoculture above? And he looked at me and said, I don't know. How would you do that? Well, my answer was, so I asked him another question. And I said, because he talked about these exudates, the things coming out of the roots to feed the biodiversity, and that's what he's doing. He's putting polycultures in there to feed different exudates to grow diverse biology. Right? You gotta have different food to have different microbes. And so I asked him, what if I could get concentrated root exudates without, and apply those to the field? Then I would have, diverse microorganisms and diverse food. And he looked at me and said, how would you do that? I said, fermentation. Fermentation. So what I came to realize by looking at these two things here was that what we have in natural farming are these two tools. We can put the biodiversity right on the top as the microbial biodiversity from this environment. We just take this biodiversity we captured, we put it into this environment, and then even though we're still growing a monoculture of soybean, we feed it an FPJ from sweet potato, from comfrey, from these different plants that we have, and now we've taken the biodiversity here, plus all the foods that would have come from a polyculture, and now we're able to get the efficiency of monocultures without monoculturing. And so I found this to be hugely interesting, and that's why I think natural farming thrives in certain situations. And the whole key is this vast biodiversity. So we can get those inoculants, and each of the microbes within an acre, so you see this many cows outlined there? That's how much microbe there are equivalent weight in 2.3 acres. It's something that's like a couple cows per acre of, if you took all the microbes and compressed them together, you'd have that many animals. So when you hear people talking about these systems where they're integrating grazing into cultures, like Joe Salatin's methods, we actually have the cows grazing under the ground. So if you come to a natural farming thing and you say, oh, well, where's the livestock in your monoculture thing? They're actually under the ground. Our microbes are doing all this grazing for us. And I thought this was one of the most telling slides here of the two principles I often talk about. She said, you gotta protect your microbiology and you gotta feed it. So when I often talk about natural farming, I say on one hand you have microorganisms, and on the other hand you have foods. So we have our IMO and our LAB, those are the microorganisms. So in this case where she says protect, she isn't even aware of this inoculate, right, coming in. We're beyond protection, we're at introduction and then beyond that protection. And then the feeds, which come in by understanding the nutrient cycle and pretty much always putting FPJ, which is your root exudates, putting PRV, which is your acids to kind of help dissolve, as well as balance out your FPJ, and the OHN, which is always a medicine, right? So for us, we always need food plus medicines, and PRV is sort of a cleanser. We gotta excrete our waste correctly. And so via natural farming, we're not only protecting, we're also introducing, and then we're always feeding. And these are the two basic keys of what she was talking about. How do you bring soil back to health? And these are the core principles of the methods we learned here. So they're talking a lot about the polycultures and the worms that come in from doing polycultures. But just by applying diverse IMO to the top of your surface, who has noticed their worms increase? Right? So by doing this same activity without necessarily the polycultures on top, because they're talking a lot about polyculture cover crops, and I do think there's value there. But he's showing that by just doing that, we get this. We do the same thing without the polyculture, and we're getting the same effect. So I think what we're on to is, in terms of research, we're right there. It's not, the tip of the spear, we're like out in front. It's the air splitting in front of the spear being thrown at the target. And so I just wanted to show this slide here. This is one of the more striking slides that I think really made an impact on folks there. This field is the same conditions. They had a drought that year. Instead of getting 7 inches of rain, we got 2, which is crazy, that's a drought. I mean, we get so much more rain than this, it's funny, but what happened here in the front was this is just the cash crop being sown. In the back, this is the cash crop that you can see the white wisps coming up above, plus 5 other cover crops. So there's a polyculture cover crop that they put in. So you'll see the same effect via using IMO4. Right? The crops that you planted without that in your dead soil die in a drought, whereas the ones that you put IMO4 are able to withstand. And it's that diverse biology that's bringing water into your soils. And in this case, obviously it's better covered when things grew in. But this is the leading edge research of showing, okay, well, we sow these polycultures. But if you were able to get this same result back here, up here, without that polyculture, it's going to make your harvesting that much easier. Right? Because back when they have to do all kinds of sorting and other things. And so as a natural farmer, you can do this one in the front, where it looks like the one in the back, but you're able to pull off a much better crop than your neighbor who doesn't understand the diversity and then feeding the right crops. We're doing strong liquids.
So in certain applications, you just wouldn't cover crop because it's unnecessary?
I always think that you should keep your soil covered. It's just like you don't want an open wound, so you should always cover it because naturally it'll want to grow a scab. So weeds will come in that are scabs to cover and things. So whether you're going to put a Band-Aid, which is mulch, or you're going to put a living cover crop is always a good idea. But the importance of polyculture cover crops, for us, we're getting that same benefit via our IMO4. And so again, behind her, this is Jen talking about us, and I really like her shirt. It says soil. And these are 5 test plots in the front, where each of these were a single cover crop put in, planted by themselves. Then there's a small 10-foot row of sun hemp in there. And then in the back is all 5 of these crops combined. And this is about 6 weeks of growth. And so by using polycultures, they're bringing the soil back to life, and this is what they're doing. But again, just to show you kind of the monoculture, what happens if you're not including that diverse biology, you just don't get the same result. And I thought this was also one of the most telling slides. This was a hard hitter for me because he basically considered his 4 neighbors, or his 3 neighbors that are adjacent to his farm. The first guy is doing organic management, which is USDA organic. He's tilling, he's throwing down organic fertilizers, whatever those may be, and he is getting 2 parts of nitrogen per whatever unit this is in. Then his other neighbor is no-till, but low diversity, and he's getting a little bit more, about 20 times what the organic guy was getting this tilling. Then the guy that's doing no-till with medium diversity and high synthetics, he's getting a little bit more diversity, or a little bit more nitrogen. But this bottom one is Dave Brown's one. He's doing no-till, high diversity, no synthetic fertilizer plus livestock, and he's getting 281.
Wow.
So that's like, what, 100%, almost 100 and whatever percent, or times more. Yeah, 100 times more available nitrogen. And that's across the board for all of these things. His numbers are just off the charts compared. And this is the same thing you'll find with by using IMO. That the basic idea is that you have sand, silt, or clay. And in each grain of sand, there is more nutrients than could feed this entire island in one grain. But the problem is in that grain, it's not next to the plant. And so by increasing the diversity and the biology in your soil, they're able to break that grain down and make it available to your plants. So all your NPK, which we continually throw on the soil, he hasn't thrown anything on his soil for the past 20 years, and he has this much in his soil. You think, oh, well, it's going to get depleted. No, the biology is actually breaking it out of the sand, silt, and clay when he's able to get those exudates, which is our FPJ, plus his diversity into the soil. So this is what he's doing to really crank it up.
What's the last number?
The last one is something organic content. I don't know what the WE stands for. Sorry.
Sorry, Jerry. I'm going back one. So the Gabe's thing was no-till, high density.
High density, no synthetic, and livestock. Yep. And this is tested by some university here in Temple, Texas. So what he really got to at the end of his presentation, and unfortunately he kind of ran a little long on time, and they were really militant about the time, which is something I admire about them, is that he got to this mycorrhiza fungi build soil aggregates. So again, these are scientific terms that we need to start using, right? When we talk about IMO, it's like, okay, what is that? Well, if you say, oh, well, this is concentrated mycorrhizal fungi, or a stimulant, a prerequisite for that to naturally appear. These are the guys that motivate in terms of prebiotic. Now you're able to say, and it's building soil aggregates, right? It's not making my soil rich or whatever. You can actually use these terms to say, okay, it's balling up the soil. When you see these soil balls, you say, oh, that's nice aggregation. It's happening from the thing. And this is why when you go gather your IMO, you want to gather it from a rich forest environment. Because I can just take starch, I can just take a thing of rice and put it right here on the table, but am I going to have mycorrhizal fungi that are real soil aggregates? No. I will have the nice cotton candy, but what you're trying to get is to go to those rich environments with those starches, capture the mycorrhizal fungi, and then introduce that to your other environment. And that's what's really gonna make your farming work. He also then got to this, this is what I've been, was what I learned from Elaine really a lot. And this is what enabled me to understand the value of IMO and why to make it correctly. Why not just let the temperature shoot up the roof, like why does Master Joe tell us keep low temperature? Because you're growing fungus. And if you can change the fungal to bacterial ratios, which is what this is outlining, you can see the results between this one and this one, and its different fungal to bacterial ratios. It's just undeniable. This is the thing when Ginger John followed Master Joe's process and his kohala starts were twice the size as his best organic methods, that he got started dancing. Because this is the results. And this is the process we're going through, is to change this fungus to bacterial ratio in our soils. The fungus is so vital to us, and right now it's under assault. All of our emissions that we do, all of our land practices. I was sitting with Steve Lund by the pool, and I've been talking about the whole world's getting coated in petroleum. And so the fungus that used to symbiotically work with our forest is now cleaning. and it's cleaning all day, and it forgot to feed the tree because it's like, oh, there's more mess to clean. I can't think about feeding you right now. I gotta clean before I can cook. And as he was saying that, I could like smell the jet fuel that's just present in our upper atmosphere that's raining down on us constantly and just assaulting the fungi everywhere. So globally, forests are declining. And I believe it has a direct relationship to this. We used to have nice abundant forests. As we kill off our fungi, we start to go back this way. And now we're like, oh, why doesn't the ohia tree grow? Why doesn't this oak just take over the forest like it used to? And it's because we killed off the fungus. And that is just leaving bacteria around. And that's why these methods are so important for us and everywhere. And this was another key point that I thought was there, is majority of fertilizer, no matter what initial form, goes through microbes before the plant gets it. So it goes through microbes. So when we're there and we want to like throw chemical fertilizer or this or that, you need the microbes. Even if you are using a chemical fertilizer thing, if you kill off your microbes in your soil, you won't have as much results. Your fertilizer will be less effective every year. And it's because it goes through your microbes, no matter what initial form, always. And so understanding this and understanding why we want to build our soil and why we want to put rich microbes out there is, to me, like, it's the whole reason. No matter what your farming style, you still gotta have your microbes.
Well, the chemical salt fertilizers kill a lot of soil life. I mean, the salts are poison, right?
It depends. It all depends. I'm super non-dogmatic of the way when I'm teaching natural farming, I teach as true to Master Cho's teachings as I can, but your actual practical, how you do it, how you make your bottom line, everyone has a different style. And yeah, so that's what I found.
Can you go back to the last slide for 1 second? Thank you.
Yeah. So, and again, just looking at this field again, these were the monoculture cover crops. This is the row of sun hemp, and then this is the polyculture thing happening here. So this is the reinforced polyculture aspect that we get without necessarily putting polyculture above to maintain that efficiency. I think that's all I had for that there. So, what are we at, 2:50 here? So yes.
Were these receptive to your translation or your ideas?
So first off, I'd like to say that these aren't my ideas. I'm standing on the shoulders of giants. I really appreciate all these things I was able to gather. Sometimes I go to sleep and I wake up with a great idea, and I just like to think that it's something else. Were they receptive to my ideas? I learned in my journey through natural farming not to tell people they're wrong or tell people that I have a better idea. So what I did with Gabe was I asked him a few questions. I asked, could you have diversity below without diversity above? And it made him kind of scratch his head and start thinking about it. Then I asked him, could we make exudates without these polycultures? And again, he was like, how? And I said, fermentation. He started scratching his head and he's like, Because that's what's happening in the soils, right? We know that as nature. And what I found in my journey with natural farming is, if you do it right, you cannot stop people from copying it. How many people come to a no-smell pig pen and go home and try to copy that as soon as possible? But you could go to them, just like when Master Cho came to my DuPont and he said, I got no-smell pigs, and he laughed him out of his office. Right? But as soon as Mike DuPont went to Korea and he saw that, he was just crying. And he was like, oh, wow. And you couldn't stop Mike DuPont today.
Yeah.
He's not going to go back until you put in a wash down system. You cannot stop it.
No.
Because you witnessed it in action and somebody took the thing and you do it. So if people aren't listening to you when you say, oh, da, 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 no worries. Maybe one day say, oh, maybe you want to come to my farm, or what the project I did in downtown Hilo, where I just went into the town and planted kohala right in the middle of town, and that thing was just pumping.
Yeah.
You know, so get a small area where people can see it, and let them come to you and ask a question. Say, oh, how come the kohala is so big? How come the banana fruit is so early? How come your little kids are coming back to life? And it's always easier. Well, I don't think I did that.
How you're comparing FPJ to an exudate,
Yeah.
and then exudates are so specific for nutrient and mineral uptake. Is the type of FPJ gonna, at some point when you get the science down, that's gonna equal the exudate that the plant would want, or you're just talking a general exudate?
Okay, so the question was about exudates, and are there specific ones that work?
Well, basically, an exudate attracts what it needs.
Yeah. Okay, so why is FPJ in my mind analogous to these exudates? So number one is that they are produced without heat and without pressure. The only heat that is involved in that process is a natural heat that would occur in the soil, in nature. And it's the heat of fermentation. The only pressure that is applied is osmotic pressure, which does not rupture the cell wall. It just osmotically pulls the best nutrients across and leaves everything else in the plant. And you compost or discard that or feed it to your animals or whatever you're gonna do. You're just getting the best juice that came out. So because you're producing without heat and pressure, these two things are unlike any other thing that I've seen out on the market that anyone else is producing. Everything else, like producing regular fertilizer, high energy intensity, bound with salts. And the third thing is that it's bound with sugar. Sugar acts as a preservative, but as soon as it's diluted, it now becomes another food. So in those three aspects, FPJ is superior. Now, what type of FPJ should you use? That's why Master Cho recommends different FPJs for different growth stages. That's why he also recommends certain plants at different times. I find just in general, something like a comfrey is loaded with a lot of things. It grows really well here, it's easy for me to get a hold of. And the banana cake heat's another one that gives a whole lot of juice. It's really easy, lots of vigor. But that's why also when you're making your mixes, when you're going through the nutrient cycle, and we just say up here FPJ, well, think in your mind, okay, well, I can include a couple different FPJs in there. You know, half this one, half that one, and I'll get these different growths happening.
Do you think that natural farming, and it may already be there, but do you think it can get to a point where we say, oh, it's an iron deficiency, we need this FPJ?
So when you're talking about correcting deficiencies with natural farming, primarily the biology and getting, once you got enough animal for, like, you know, diverse biology, you shouldn't have these deficiencies. And when we're looking at FPJ, I largely compare it to food. So I'm not necessarily, like calcium, calphos, fish amino acid are to kind of change what's happening, whereas FPJ to me is more of a food. And then just like we have foods, you can eat a dessert, you can eat a main course, you can eat a poo-poo, you can eat these different things that will change your behavior, how you're going about it. But largely the FPJs are food. So if you're having deficiencies, feeding the biology, re-inoculating that biology should correct majority of that. But yeah, what I've seen the most actually in that is human health. So we know different plants provide different things, like they're talking about moringa to help combat diabetes. Well shoot, ferment moringa and then eat that. And these different properties we know plants have, in humans I've seen the most effect. Because our IMOs are really weird. Versus the soil, you can put diversity out there, but to put diversity into me, it's like, where do you start? I gotta take someone Joe's poop and like, I don't know. People transfer, like, a healthy specimen and then transfer it. It's different.
Oh, great, good job explaining those 3 points. It really was magical and wonderful as always. But you're very humble and you give credit to all the giants. But did they say exact those 3 things, or did you come up with that particular 3 points?
The 3 points.
The osmotic pressure, the fermentation heat, and I forgot to write down the other thing. You said.
Third thing is the sugar.
Oh, that's sugar. Yeah, sugar becomes food.
Right.
Yeah.
I spent a fair amount of time just like sitting and staring at my whiteboard and I write a bunch of things out that and I just sit there and stare at it. And then I also, I've noticed in my own body how these things happen. But I don't think anyone's told me that. Maybe.
You just link together.
Yeah, synthesis.
His knowledge and their
Yeah,
knowledge.
that's great.
Is there an ideal or like balanced ratio of fungal to bacterial in like a healthy soil, or is it dependent on what is growing in that soil?
So that's a good question. Is there an ideal fungus to bacterial ratio, or does it change? And it changes based on the crop you're growing. So things that are quick growing, fast, like weeds, tend to be highly bacterial oriented. So if you want to grow a lot of weeds, bacterial oriented, you'll get tons of fireweed growing in your pasture. You'll have medicinal plants growing really well. If you want to grow a old growth forest, you will look and they will have tons of fungus. It'll be highly fungally oriented. Old growth forest grows really slow, is in it to win it for the long run, and it tends to be more fungal oriented. So typically where we want to be is in the middle for our annual or perennial crops. Kind of we want, when Elaine talked about it, it was about 600 bacteria to 600 fungus, and that's biomass per gram, I think, so I don't know the exact numbers, but she had a way of quantifying it. And so we want to be in the middle. What I found here in Hawaii is we're extremely fungal deficient, just in general. So it's almost always better to have more fungus in your IMO to inoculate it and then to see that happen. And I found the same IMO pretty much works for everything. It's then the mulch that you put on top that is the determining factor. So if I'm growing lettuce, I use the IMO4, but then I put wood chips there, I'm going to slow down the growth of my lettuce versus I grow the lettuce and I put grass clippings there. Now my lettuce is going to do fine. If I'm growing fruit trees and I put a bunch of wood chips around in tandem with my IMO4, then I'm going to get even more fungal growth. So it's what's feeding your microbes once they're in your system is what I found. But I'm not, like Joe was saying, you spray. If I was more on that, and really I don't want to say more on, less on is not to be a moron. But making your spray equipment correct for you, and this is something I've increased in my life lately, is I bought a sweet power sprayer to be able to go deal with my whole area I want to treat. Before that, I was like too hippie and trying to do all kinds of this, barefoot stuff. And sometimes you just gotta burn a little gas to get things done. And in the long run, it's, you're better off.
What make of your power spray do you have? Do you recommend?
Marion one's what I got. Marion one, kind of 75E, but I really should get a sponsorship from a Marion before I start advertising. If you call them, tell them Trace.
I have a garden plot and I have 2 rows of kohala, which aren't flowering, and I have a row of papaya, watercress. I have different things that are close together. So if I spray a changeover, what are my dangers of overspray onto other plants that are nearby if they're not needing that specific nutrient?
So one thing, so that's a great question. You have 2 crops next to each other and then different growth stages. What do you do? And this, when I go to Korea and I look, it's like one greenhouse all at the same stage and treating all the same things. So these formulas really make sense there. For me, I go out, I have polyculture plantings. It's just the way my garden's set up, along the permaculture style of doing it. And so I got all these different stages. So what do? Well, that's when I'm here at the advanced training because he knows all about this the most. What so far my advice has been is to alternate week by week. So one week I'm going to encourage this, the next week I'm going to encourage that. And alternating between, just like he was talking about the baby gets chubby and skinny and chubby and skinny. Same things, your plants, if you alternate back and forth and you make them more chubby one week and more flowering one week, and you alternate back and forth, I found that to be effective. But, I'm not the expert. Cool. Okay, very fine. Okay. So here I was talking about that. The other thing that I wanted to talk about here. Are there any more questions on this before I transition to something else?
I had a question about the alcohol that you can use to hydrate OHN.
Can you speak up?
If you have a bunch of extra apples and you make apple wine out of it, can you use that to hydrate your ingredients in OHN?
Yeah, alcohol content is looking at a fermented product. So usually when I teach, I try to teach as by the book as I can, as what I was received. Because as Joe was saying, there's a lineage to this. And what I find is if I teach you my modification, then you go and you think that's the way. And then forever, whoever you teach thinks that modification is the way. So I got this example. My computer science professor took his rump roast at Thanksgiving. And on the recipe it said cut off the back part and put it in a pan and bake it. And he asked one day, he asked his wife, why are you cutting off the rump? Isn't that the best part of the rump roast? And she's like, well, the recipe says to do this, right? And so forever she'd done it that way. So he goes to his grandma, who she got the recipe from, and he asked her, and luckily she's still alive, why are you cutting off the rump roast? Well, it turns out the pan was too small, so you got to cut off the thing to put it so it would fit inside the oven. But now they had a bigger pan, they had a bigger oven, there was no reason to cut that off, right? But if I pass that down and my recipe says cut off the head and throw it away, now forever people are going to be cutting off the best part of the rump roast and not realizing why those things are there. So in my learning, I always try to pass on how I learn. So I often, I'd say collect IM1 rice, because that's how I learn. There are many reasons to use rice. It is a white rice. The hull is taken off, so it's an available starch. The animal grows so nice on it, it does what you want it to do. There are very many reasons to keep it the way we learn. However, the other day I was on Facebook and I realized people take me a little too literally, and they're like, oh, we can use uru, we can use kawo. And I'm like, yeah, you can use what's at your feet, you can use these things, these starches. And so that's why when I teach, I want to say, okay, so this question came up to me just now about the wine. Can I use wine from this specific part? What you need is a fermented, slightly alcoholic thing for rehydration. That's the general rule. Why do they use soju or makgeolli actually? They use makgeolli? Why do they use that? Well, it has, just like the rice, has certain principles that are really applicable. So the general rule is this, the specifics are that, and that's how I want to teach you. Now, if you go and you use what you got, do that, but then always teach the way that we've kind of learned and passed down, and there's reason for that. So all of a sudden now you're not adding as much sugar and you think it's cool, but then your kids all of a sudden don't have these exudates anymore. They have crushed plant material and they're like, why can't I grow, you know? And so we gotta pass down the lineage, but then you gotta use what works and make it applicable to your area. So sometimes when you hear me say rice and stuff, you think, wow, I'm not gonna get rice. Well, pass the rice on, talk about this, know why you would use rice, but then use ulu or whatever. And in fact, I've seen guys collect it on kohala and then put it back on the kohala, and I think there's a lot of wisdom in that even. Yeah.